All right, I see that we're at the top of the hour. So at this point, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar regarding methodologies for asphalt pavement recycling. And my name's Tim Aschenbrenner. I'm with FHWA Office of Infrastructure. And this webinar is presented as results we have of our FHWA University of Nevada, Reno Cooperative Agreement on development and deployment of innovative asphalt pavement technologies, or DDIAPT. And we're all about implementation. We have 15 or so tasks we're working on to facilitate implementation. And today's topic, we'll have about a 45-minute presentation followed by Q&A. We'll have up to 45 minutes for that. So if you have any questions, be sure to enter them into the chat. Before we get started, I just wanted to highlight some upcoming webinars. December 21st, we're going to highlight a peer exchange we had on reducing carbon footprint, some techniques, needs, and opportunities. On February 15th, we're going to talk about our peer exchange findings from balanced mix design, some findings and challenges we've encountered for implementation. And on March 7th, we're going to review the overall products that we've generated over the past 5 years. Hard to believe our agreement's been going on for 5 years. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Hand from the University of Nevada, Reno for today's presentation. So Adam, it's all yours.
Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're in. And thank you for the introduction, Tim. And I don't know where 5 years went, but it's been a fun ride. Today, we're gonna share some work that this is a project that actually Tim and I worked on together. And like many of the other tasks associated with this agreement, we developed a tech brief and a report and so forth that Tim just talked about in this webinar. Okay, advance. There we go. We always have to start these webinars with the disclaimer, and essentially I'll allow you give you a minute to read it. In summary, though, that this information is disseminated under sponsorship of the government in the interest of information exchange, and government doesn't take any liability associated with the use of the information, and the government doesn't endorse producers or manufacturers, and any of the standards that might be for instance here, standards and specifications aren't required under federal requirements. So, and I'll give you a minute longer if you want to read the details. And I apologize, I should have started this off with thanking any of you out there today that are vets for your service. And I certainly appreciate it. And I know that, the folks that live in this country that we're blessed to live in do also. The next slide here is abbreviations, and I think these are probably familiar to most of you. A couple that I'll highlight along the way, just so that when you see some slides, some are going to get used a lot, are INDOT is Indiana DOT. We've got New Mexico DOT, which is NMDOT, New York State DOT, NYS DOT, South Carolina DOT, which is SCDOT, and Virginia DOT, which is VDOT. So this, again, want to make sure those were familiar to you, because we've got, we'll use those quite a bit in the presentation. So this slide really shows the outline of the tech brief, which really follows the outline of our reports. As Tim said, we did individual site visit reports, then we did the summary report, and then the tech brief. So they're consistent sort of in outline. And we're just going to step through these sections. I will suggest that the tech brief, there's a page limit, and the idea is a brief, right? We want to get information in as concise a form as possible. But if you want to dig into details, the summary report it's a very long report, but it's got lots of information and details if you have a specific question and it doesn't get answered today. This is part of, as Tim had said, is part of this agreement, the DDIPT, and we work in innovation areas. This work was done under the resource responsible use of materials for flexible pavement systems, and some of the other work that we've done is listed in here. And the important thing is over on the far right column, FHWA publications associated with each of these tasks are listed, and of course there's a URL at the bottom of the page that you can use to go get to all that information. So when we started this work, we did a couple of things. One was we looked and said, what are agencies doing in terms of recycling, in particular in-place recycling, and the scope of it was ultimately what you see on the screen: CIR, cold in-place recycling, full depth reclamation, cold central plant recycling, which is a little different, right? It's not in place, and hot in place recycling. So those are the techniques that were included. And on the bottom here, that's cold central plant. Bottom left, on the bottom right, we've got a hot in place operation. And then in the middle, we've got an FDR, full depth reclamation, and on top, we have a CIR. So our objectives were really to learn some of the positive things that state DOTs were doing, that states that were using these techniques and were successful, what were they doing to help make them successful? And then we wanted to collect that information and communicate their experiences, lessons learned, and performance information. And there's a fair amount of pretty good performance information out there that we were able to gather. And then obviously identify gaps for creation of research need statements. And it was our goal not to try to overlap on any other documents that are out there. For example, ERA has a lot of documents, FHWS and previous documents, but really was to sort of to see what's going on today, as opposed to when those were developed, and share anything that was going to be beneficial to folks. In order to do that, we had what we called virtual site visits. On some of these tasks, we've actually gone to public agencies. This particular task, we were as we organized this, we were coming out of COVID and we weren't traveling, so we actually had meetings virtually with the 5 DOTs that you see listed on the screen, as well as central and western federal lands together. We met with folks from those two agencies at the same time. So it was really 6 agencies altogether, 5 state DOT, and then federal lands. And federal lands, just for your own edification, I always, when I think of central federal lands, I think it's like the middle of the country, and then western's on the west and the eastern's on the east, and that's not exactly how the boundaries are defined. So this is always nice to share with folks, so that when we're talking about western, where western is and central is. And we didn't leave eastern out. Eastern, though, doesn't use these technologies as much as the other two do. So as far as scope, we did we defined what technologies we're going to use. We had kickoff and planning meetings with the agencies. Then we had 2 to 3 day visits. So the poor folks, we would get them on the phone in the morning for, say, 3 hours, and then 3 hours in the afternoon. We prepared questionnaires and provided them to the teams, and it was typically a team of maybe 4 to 6 or more people at an agency. We really had conversations, asked questions, took notes, and then based on that, we developed a report for each agency, which we shared with them to make sure that what the data we collected was correct. And then ultimately that summary report was written, and it's 100 and something pages. Again, it's a lot of detail there. And then the tech briefing, obviously today, our webinar. Now, to get into some of the data, this slide summarizes the technologies that the different agencies were using, and you can see none of them were really the same. And it's obviously, there's reasons for that. And so in the first column, we've got the technology type, which was CIR, CCPR, or FDR. And then across to the right, we've got the different agencies. And so New Mexico DOT used all 4 technologies. South Carolina only uses FDR. And then there are 3 that federal lands, INDOT and Virginia, Indiana DOT and Virginia DOT that use CIR, CCPR, and FDR. And again, there's reasons for this, right? Every state situation is unique, right? And then there were 2 that use hot in place recycling, New Mexico and New York State. And then the years of experience with the technologies in the table at the bottom part of the slide, we asked the question, how long have you been using these technologies? And I think some of these numbers are a little bit misleading because some entities said, well, we used to use it and we quit using it and we've just been using it again now X years. For example, New Mexico DOT with 3 years of experience. They've done a fair amount of cold place recycling in New Mexico, but much of it was quite a few years back. So the numbers in that table are sort of taken with a grain of salt because some of them they have more experience, but because of gaps, they didn't really want to list them as continuous years, if you will. Now, this slide shows the percentage of the recycling program that is cold in place recycling, CCPR, FDR, and hot in place recycling. And I'm going to skip the federal lands for a minute and just work our way over to the right. We'll start with Indiana DOT. So at the time, and this is ever changing, right? Every year is a different year. At the time, about 38% of their program was CIR, 12% was CCPR, and 50% was FDR. New Mexico DOT, about 10% CIR, 40% CCPR, and 50% FDR. New York State was and they gave us a range of 50 to 65 on CIR and 35 to 50 on HIR. Again, South Carolina was 100% FDR. And then Virginia was about 20% CIR, 18% CCPR, and 62% FDR. So again, different agencies are using different techniques. Those that are most effective for their needs, and their total distribution of their recycling program is different among the states. Now, I skipped over federal lands, and I just want to provide an explanation there. So the numbers in the right-hand side or in parentheses are the reported percentages, but they also use millings as a recycling technique. And so 10% of their program is just wrap millings. And so the numbers to the left that aren't in parentheses are the percentages accounting for the fact that 10%, we were doing it in percent of the total, they're bumped up. Okay, so it's 6% CIR and CCPR, and then about 88% FDR. Okay, so as far as performance goes, we're fortunate in that an NCHRP synthesis that had been started several years earlier was published while we were in the midst of this work. And some really good information came out of that. 40 states participated in a survey that was used to develop the synthesis. And essentially, the highlights are on this page. And 2 of them, let me back up. At the bottom of the page, again, there's a link to that NCHRP synthesis. And 2 key observations from that document were that service lives for cold recycled pavements range from 20 to 34 years. When used in conjunction with an overlay, so they got surface, right? And then cold recycling with an overlay can reduce costs of a project from 40 to 60%, and greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced about 50%. That was very encouraging information. And then we obviously looked at the literature, right? In addition to that synthesis, and some newer work that was listed that is highlighted here is some recent verification or validation of those statements that were in the synthesis. So CIR and CCPR versus new hot mix. Energy consumptions reduced 56 to 64%, and greenhouse gas emissions being reduced 39 to 46%. That was a 2019 publication, and then another one in 22 sort of pretty much said the same thing. So and while here, the second bullet is in reference to the FHWA towards sustainable pavement systems. That's a long document. It was put together in 2015, and some of you probably participated in the sustainability twig meeting this week. Really, that was an outcome of the twig, and it's a very useful document. And so I encourage you to go look at that also if you've never looked at it. Indiana DOT with FDR projects shared some information with us, and essentially we, based on a structural analysis, they are estimating cost savings relative to replacement. So doing an FDR versus basically reconstruction of 40 to 70%. And these are 4 example projects. So again, very encouraging information on the successful use of recycling technologies. This is federal lands data. And on what you see here is on the left is an existing pavement that's 3 inches of hot mix on an aggregate base. And then the 2 rehabilitation alternatives, really. One is in the middle to CIR that 3 inches and then put 2 inches of hot mix on it, compared with removing the existing hot mix and coming back with 4 inches of hot mix. That would essentially give you an equivalent structural capacity, right? The 2 alternatives on the right. And the cost of the reconstruction was estimated to be about 40% higher than the CIR rehabilitation alternative. This is also federal lands data. And this is a plot of pavement condition rating, PCR versus age. So we've got years on the x-axis and PCR on the y-axis. The PCR is a composite condition rating that's based on surface conditions as well as roughness. And what's interesting here is 95 to 100% is excellent or new. And then 85 to 94 is good condition. And there are 3 lines. And if you're colorblind, the bottom one is red, and that's FDR with 3 inches of AC on it. The top line is FDR with 5 inches of AC, and that's the blue dots. And then the middle one is CIR. But what's really encouraging with that is that out at 15 years, there's a whole lot of pavement that is still in that good condition range. And again, very, very, very positive data, especially for the CIR and the FDR with the thicker hot mix. And these are some examples of projects. The one on the left is Washington Road. It's in the Tahoe National Forest off of US 20 in Northern California. That project is about an hour and a half from here. And I can't believe it was 2009. I remember it being built. The next slide here has got a road. It goes up to a reservoir called Ice House Reservoir. It's in again Northern California. It would be in the Sierras to the east of Sacramento. Ice House Road intersects with US 50 if you're familiar with that part of the country. On the left is the pavement after 22 years, and on the right it's the pavement after 31 years. And I've driven this many times over the years. I have a good friend that lives over there and always tries to drag me fishing. And I never knew that I'd see it show up in a FHWA presentation, but it's great. And I'm familiar with this one, and it's performing well. This one is I've not seen, and it's been reconstructed. It was in place for 26 years. It's a CIR built in 1982 in Rocky Mountain National Park. And actually, the plan was to let it go to 30. It ended up getting reconstructed after 28, just because of the scheduling and the availability of funds and so forth. But it was probably would have made it to 30. So I guess the point of all of this is there's some really encouraging, not only performance data, but cost data, and we know that our in-place recycling technologies lead to significantly reduced carbon footprint. So our greenhouse gas emissions. So all good news for recycling technologies. A topic that was very people were very passionate about was project selection criteria. And there are some examples listed here that were good examples that were shared. Again, each entity had the techniques that they used to do their project selection. The federal land specs have very detailed requirements in them. And again, very well documented processes. The Indiana DOT and New York State DOT both were really good examples, and they even included flow charts of the processes, which to me graphically it's always helpful when you see things graphically rather than 20 pages of text. So those were good examples, and then there's a tech brief. This is I think a 2012, if my memory serves me right, tech brief on project selection guidelines for cold in place and cold central plant pavement recycling. And again, the URLs to all of those are available. When it comes to project selection, we kind of, with the amount of time that we have, we decided to sort of maybe focus on primarily on CIR as an example, and you'll find similar information for all of the technologies in the tech brief and in the detailed reports. But in the interest of time to go through all of these technologies in great detail, it just wasn't a reality. So this is for CIR, right? So this is would be a good candidate, right? To end of the service life. It's got minimal patching. It's got some fatigue cracking, and there's at least 3 inches of hot mix there. We don't have a bunch of steep grades or a bunch of structures that have to be tied into and so forth. This would be maybe a poor candidate because, again, geometric significant grades, being less than 3 inches thick. Geotextiles in the milling area or the milling depth are obviously an issue with CIR, and then the need to tie into existing structures. So they're just a couple of examples. As far as project selection goes, again, I said the FHWA specifications have very detailed requirements, and this example here is just the field summary, some of the field investigation where they go out and core, and then look at pavement, the thickness of the hot mix layer, and then do borings and get some information on the existing structure beneath the hot mix asphalt. And one of the points here to make is that there's obviously variable thickness in the table on the bottom right. You see between 3.6 and 5 inches there, and so you have to really be looking at the controlling thickness, right? What is the thinnest part of the pavement? And if you don't want to go out to do a CIR, not collect enough information to know that you've got locations where you only have 1.5 inches of hot mix, for example, because it's going to change your operations, right? And so part of the point here is collecting enough information. And we heard this repeatedly from each of the agencies that we talked to was if you don't spend enough up front to make sure you know what's out there, can create hiccups for you, as you go to build the job. So again, a good example. This is Indiana DOT's pavement treatment selection diagram. And if you start on the far left, you've got an existing pavement. You think you're going to go do an overlay. And there's a very clear path. So you start. Can you see my mouse?
No, I cannot.
You cannot. Okay.
No.
If you start on the left with the overlay, you work your way down, and then depending on whether the pavement is composite or full depth, and what sort of repairs have been done in concrete pavement. If it's concrete, you've got a set of alternatives that are down on the bottom left, which include mill, perform CCPR, and HMA overlay, and then you can work your way down there. If you answer right to know to both of those two diamonds on the left, you go up to the top right and you go to full depth, full depth. And then you work your way down to, depending on the subgrade soil conditions, you work your way down to selecting alternatives that are hot mix, and you've got thicknesses of hot mix that range from less than 5 to 10, and over 10. And again, options that include FDR or CIR. So again, very, very well done. And again, it's the whole purpose of this is to share, positive examples. That was a very good diagram. The other thing we talked about with the agencies was pavement and mix design, other things. And from a structural design perspective, most of the agencies were using the AASHTO 93 method. And the layer coefficients that are in the table here are those are layer coefficients that are in the table, I should say, other than the NAs. And then the 75 to 100 KSI, that was Indiana DOT. They're using the Pavement ME software. And obviously you don't use layer coefficients, right? You use moduli for those materials. Just as a reminder, right, with CIR, we're always going to put a surface on it. Sometimes a double application chip seal will be used. I personally have seen the double application chip seals used pretty successfully in the West. And more commonly, they're surfaced with hot mix asphalt. Obviously, you're going to use a tack coat in between. We look at material selection for binders and active fillers. We saw a combination of things, right? We saw some agencies using emulsion and foam, right? Foaming was typically with 6422s, PG6422s, and then we saw emulsions and engineered emulsions. As far as active fillers, Portland cement was everybody was using. Although federal lands and New Mexico, you could either use cement or lime. And in the case of FLH, it had to be a lime slurry. So again, states are using what they've deemed successful. When it comes to mix design, VDOT at the time was using the Marshall mix design. I assume they still are, with 75 blows. The other agencies were all using gyratory compactor. 3 of them with 30 gyrations, and then federal lands is using 35. And there's sort of a mix. This is with emulsion. With emulsion, there was either indirect tensile strength and TSR, or Marshall stability and retained stability were being used. The INDOT in New Mexico added the raveling test, and there are. I should back up for a minute. There are AASHTO provisional standards for CIR and CCPR, and these agencies were using many of the things that are in those AASHTO provisional standards, and raveling is one of the items that's in there. But so 2 out of the 5 states were using the raveling portion. The states that were using foamed asphalt either use indirect tensile strength and TSR, or retained Marshall stability. And obviously with the foaming, you need to be paying attention to your half-life also, right? As far as FDR goes, there's a couple slides in here in FDR, and I'm not going to go into the beyond that. So with the FDR, the binders were emulsion or foamed for federal lands and VDOT, and then NDOT was using emulsion, and New Mexico was using foam only. As far as active fillers go, they were all using cement, and lime was an option in Virginia, and their top material sizes varied among the agencies. As far as mix design goes, again, we see a combination of gyratory and Marshall mix designs. The same tests, right? Indirect tensile strength and tensile strength ratio, or Marshall stability and retained stability. We also saw with foamed, right, a half-life ends up in there. As far as active filler goes, Federal Lands, Portland, or everybody Portland Cement, and then lime on occasion, and then VDOT reported lime and kiln dust both. And again, topside materials were variable. For FDR cement designs, so those were the asphalt-based FDRs, right? So for cement, for compaction, you see the test methods that are listed there. Those are AASHTO test methods. And then unconfined compressive strength was used by all the agencies, and Federal Lands was using a freeze-thaw loss also. So let's go to production. When we go to production, another really positive observation was that all of these agencies had quality control requirements. And obviously, any quality assurance program needs to have agency acceptance, contractor quality control, and then technician certification, lab qualification or accreditation, and then dispute resolution and independent assurance provisions, right, or elements. And so again, it was very encouraging to see that with these states. And the items specific to the recycling technologies that we commonly saw as QC, production QC measurements were moisture content, binder, right? The amount of binder being used, and the amount of active filler also, gradation, top size, density, thickness, and curing. And one of the things that is sort of we found to be very variable among the agencies was the curing. And with CIR and CCPR, this is a summary table, and three of the entities use 0 to 2 hours in terms of opening to traffic. Two of them didn't specify. In terms of moisture content, the Federal Lands says that your moisture content's got to be less than 2.5% before you cover it up. NDOT and New Mexico were less than 3%. VDOT, which I thought was really pretty interesting because it's really about change rather than some minimum. It's less than 50% of the optimum moisture determined in the mix design process. And then there were other requirements in terms of time. So with Federal Lands, it's cover within 14 days. Okay, so if you don't get to 2.5%, you're at 14 days, you can cover it up. NDOT greater than 3 days or 10 days without rainfall. New Mexico greater than 3 days, and then emulsion greater than 10 days for New York State, and foamed greater than 3 days. It is common that foam will set up and cure faster. Now, there was some work done on an NCHRP project with the objective of basically developing rapid tests and specs for construction of asphalt treated cold recycled pavements. This was led by BTRC. Brian Diefendorfer was the prime on it, and UC Davis and University of Nevada were partners on it. And shear and raveling tests were developed as part of this. And what you see in this picture here is a DCP, right? That looks familiar to you. And then at the bottom on the far left, you see a weight. Just to the right of that, you see a fixture with some pins on it. And so what we ended up with was driving that fixture into the mat. It didn't matter if it was FDR or CIR, and recording the number of blows, as well as once it had been driven in, taking the DCP off, which was the driver, putting a torque wrench on there and measuring the torque that was required to rotate the fixture through a fixed angle. And there's some videos on that. You can go get the videos on that. This is just pictures of this. Is we're up at a field trial at MnDOT, and again, there were 3 different operators. Everybody was doing the same tests and using different equipment, but we were 3 different operators. We're trying to get a sense of variability. And the outcome of this was basically recommendations on both number of blows and torque, minimum torque, that should be observed prior to opening to traffic. So that would be the raveling test, right? And then the long pin, that was a short-term rattling test. And then the long pin shear test was for stability, right? And the numbers are obviously higher for the shear test. So now, folks are using moisture today, and this was an attempt to come up with a means of measuring the properties rather than moisture, because moisture is so variable. It can rain, all those types of things. That work was completed, and there's a URL to the report. There was also another web-only report just published recently. And then in follow-up, there was another project that was done by NCAT. Ben Bowers was the lead on it, and Brian at BTRC worked on it also. And they came up with construction guide specs for cold central plant recycling and cold in place recycling. And that is the URL to that is on the bottom of the page too, bottom of the page also. So it's available, and it's really a lot of what was in the actual provisional standards are in there, but there's some more that was added, as well as there's like just-in-time training and so forth that was included in that. We didn't talk about hot and place recycling much. And so we got one slide here. Don't want to leave it out completely. Again, it's one of the tools in the toolbox. With hot place recycling, there's really sort of three types. There's surface recycling, and then surface repaving and remixing. And some of the benefits with hot in place recycling, so really positive benefits are, one is you have a renewed surface regardless of which technique you use. You end up with a renewed surface, and another is it's like hot mix, right? You can open up the traffic the same day. So, and again, with that, I would recommend that you go to the tech brief if you want more information on any of these technologies. And if you don't find what you're looking for there, the long report will probably have it. And again, if you're unable to find that stuff, you're welcome to reach out to Tim or myself. So in summary, sort of in wrapping up, these are some suggested practices, and these came from the agencies. And so you can see the items listed there: detailed treatment selection guide, regularly updating your specs, adequate site investigation, making sure you get representative samples, and then pre-construction meetings. And the ones that are in yellow are the ones that folks were most vocal about consistently among the agencies. Mixed designs, using accredited labs, and then leveraging engineered emulsions. In terms of production and acceptance, requiring QC plans, requiring control or test strips for density, including proof rolling requirements. I really like proof rolling requirements. There's always a water truck on a job, right? And it's a great way to feel comfortable, right, with the work that's been completed. Having on-site technical representatives, especially when agencies are using technologies or they're just beginning to use them. Again, the equipment manufacturers and material suppliers, they're typically very willing to come, commit their time to help agencies be successful in the early stages of getting technologies off the ground, monitoring yield, and then maintaining traffic control while curing, and then paying for binder as a separate item. And that was one of the things that really comes up in the quality discussion. What do you do to make sure you're getting the quality that you're after? And it's no different than maybe hot mix asphalt, where some agencies pay for asphalt binder as a method to encourage contractors to use enough to make sure they've got good durable mixes, not design mixes to the minimum asphalt content possible. And so again, requiring QC plans and control strips were the top two in that list. And then programmatic practices were post-project and post-season stakeholder meetings. We got both of those from the different agencies, but the long and the short of that was that they either at the end of a project or at the end of the seasons, they got together with all the stakeholders, not just the DOT by themselves or the contractors at the local association. They got together and they talked about what worked and what didn't work, and then obviously when you do that in a partnering environment like that, you can come to solutions for those things that did. You keep doing the things that did work, and come to solutions for the things that did not work. And then, of course, collecting performance data. I think as an industry, we're always challenged, right? We go out and build things, and it's a good thing they last a long time. It's a bad thing because it takes a long time to get performance data. So collecting performance data so that it's available so folks can use that it is really important. Lessons learned: using large enough minimum project sites. You're not going to go do I don't know, an FDR and only pave 3/4 of a mile, right? Making sure you have adequate drainage. There were a couple of entities that talked about running into locations with localized drainage issues and having to use additional cement, for example, with FDRs, or line some material out. Don't overlook the geometric constraints. And then this last one is really goes back to the CIR example, for example, where if you have significant changes in cross sections, right, you may require more than one mix design. I think I talked about if you got down to say 2 inches of CIR, right? You may have to do something different, and this would be more in an FDR example. But again, the idea is really, if you do adequate site investigation, you know what's there, and if you do have to do something different, you know that. Correcting geometry can be a good thing, but you have to make sure when you do that you've got enough structure. Right. And you've got a structural design, leaving adequate pavement structure in place, right? Like not getting to the base on a CIR, requiring mixed designs and quality control plans 30 days prior to construction, recognizing that recycle layer is fluff, right? So the density of those materials in place, if a CIR maybe is, 11, 13% air voids in place, and your hot mix was at 5 or 6, then and you recycle all that material, it's going to be thicker, right? When as a CIR, so you need to recognize that. Same with the other technologies. And I already talked about the Portland cement with high moisture. The first one on this list came from Virginia, and it was with night work, early season, cool temperatures. CIR breaking could be a challenge. Anybody that's been on a job where you're milling, I don't care if you're, what you're milling, knows that if you change the speed of your mill, you change the speed of the mill head, okay, you change your moisture, the temperature changes, all those things affect gradation and density, okay? If you don't calibrate your equipment, you don't know what you're getting, right? As an agency, having equipment requirements so you know how much water is being added, how much emulsion is being added, how much, depending on what you're using, your raw materials, how much of those are being added. So if you don't have methods of measuring that, and you don't verify the calibration of the equipment, then how do you know what you're getting, right? Obviously, you can look at things like bills of lading and stuff like that in terms of what showed up on the job, but how do you know it actually went into the mix? So that was something that was highlighted. With CIR, and there's really the CIR keeping rollers back from the paver, and the hot mix tech is not a CIR tech. Right, with hot mix, we're constantly preaching to the breakdown roller operators to get on the tail, stay on the tail of the screed on the paver, right? So don't let that paver get away from you. Don't let that paver get away from you. With CIR, you want to do just the opposite. You want to let them get away. Give them some time. Give that CIR a little time before you start hitting it with your breakdown rollers. And that's really those two are tied together. Tap coats are helpful. Everybody either required them or encouraged them. And then again, the post-season stakeholder meetings. With that, several references were highlighted along the way with URLs. These are some that we sort of went in with, right? The NCHRP synthesis on the left. Everybody, sort of calls the ERA document the BARM, right? The Basic Asphalt Recycling Manual. It's again very well done. And then on the right, there's the tech brief that Chris Wagner did for FHW, I think in 2000, maybe it was 2016. I can't read the number on the bottom there. A great resource is to go to the FHWA website. Under pavements, you'll find recycling, and then under recycling, you'll find asphalt pavement in place recycling technologies. You'll find the tech brief, multiple tech briefs. You'll find access to NHI training, just-in-time videos, and the checklist series on when you're doing different activities, their inspection checklist. So again, would encourage you to look at that if you didn't know that it existed. And I don't know how that happened, but I think 1 minute short of the 45 minutes Tim gave me. So I'll stop. And thank you all for again hanging with us today on the day before Veterans Day. And Tim, I guess maybe we'll open it up to questions. How are you going to handle that? And I'm fortunate Tim's here. We did this together. So if I get a question I don't like, I'll pass it to Tim.
Well, good timing, Adam. I think you had some perfect practice to hit that target on the money, I'm suspecting. A few questions came in. We'll go over those, but if you have any questions, please type those into the chat pod and we'll get to those as well. First one, Adam, came in from an agency that maybe has not done much, if at all, of the in-place recycling, and just wondering if you had any tips and tricks on how they might want to get started.
Well, I would hope that they would look to their neighbors that are using the same technologies, obviously, right, or the ones that they're interested in. But also, you know, I don't want to I guess not undervalue the fact that, again, the suppliers and equipment manufacturers are willing to help also. And I think that, you know, there's the NHI training material that's out there, right? There's access to a lot of documents, but talking to folks that have actually done it, right, to get their experiences. And again, part of our effort here was to try to go through that process and consolidate that data and highlight things that would be helpful to you. And so if I were in that scenario, things that I would do, again, would be obviously to reach out to my neighbors that were using it, go through the documentation that's available. I think, you know, Tim, I know that you've always been supportive of agencies that have reached out to us on items associated with the co-op to do, you know, provide different types of support, whether it be reviewing specs, doing workshops, that type of thing. I'll let you speak to all of that. So in addition to what I just talked about, maybe Tim, you could share your additional, you know, thoughts, especially FHWA support.
Yeah, so as part of our implementation efforts, if an agency wants to dive in a little more deeper to the topics that we're trying to encourage more implementation, we do have the opportunity to work with a state agency one-on-one, if you will, to provide technical assistance, either a webinar for that state or a spec review or whatever it is you think might get you to the next step. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and we can try to coordinate that. Okay, so yeah, I think that was a good response, Adam. And the next one is related to the in-place recycling. A lot of this has been going on for a long time, and it seems like for a while it was heavily based on contractor experience. But over time, there's been a lot of evolution. We see AASHTO standards popping up and more formal documents from the BARM and ARRA. And I don't know, I just wonder if you could speak to the evolution of standards, if it's more kind of seat of the pants engineering, relying on contractors, or how much we can rely on the engineering standards that are being developed.
But I think that you know, I'm fortunate to have worked in Nevada, right? And Nevada's used CIR a long time ago, and they still use it today, not as much as they used to. But I think you're right. There was a lot of seat of the pants. There were a lot of sort of recipe, right? So we're just going to use, you know, 1% cement or 1% lime and you know, 1.5% or 2% emulsion. And it did force folks to rely on the contractors pretty heavily. But I do believe, and again, that document, the NCHRP 1443 project. That was a really good summary of what all the different agencies are doing. And then again, there were recommended specs that came out of that, training, all that good stuff. So there is much, I think, better documented references that can be used for contract purposes, right? As well as, you know, getting things right to get jobs built. There is still a little bit of an art, if you will. I think with these technologies, it's, you know, like if you took Portland cement concrete or hot mix asphalt, you make that stuff at a plant, right? You know the raw materials going in, and you have methods in place to monitor those, so you know they're not changing, and we get very consistent materials, right? We can get very consistent materials. As we go down the road and things are different, right? So maybe in a CIR you got areas of patching, or you've got, I don't know, a chip seal on part of the job and there's not a chip seal on another part of the job. I'm making things up here, right? Or you start in the morning and it's cold and it's 100 degrees, you know, it's, I don't know, in the desert, it's 45 degrees in the morning and it's 105 in the afternoon, right? Things change. So it's hard to write into a standard how to handle some of those things. So I think that there's a lot more science behind it today, but it still requires diligence and a partnership between the contractor and the agency to be cognizant of change and respond accordingly. And that may, again, you're not going to find all of that in the spec. So I think there is a little bit of that, but you know, compared to where we were, you know, 20 years ago, I mean, we've come, the industry has come a long ways.
Yeah, and before I get to the next question, I
I don't know
just
if that,
wanted to note that we had help some participants from Brazil and Nigeria. So I thought that was interesting. Thanks for sharing that information.
can we go visit
Um,
and help them get going too?
yeah. And the next question, Adam, when you're showing the 6 core elements of a quality assurance program, you listed some common QC activities, and and then the question is, for acceptance, what do you see as the most important 1, 2, or 3 acceptance criteria when
Yeah.
building, for example, a CIR? I can't remember the slide off.
Yeah, well, I was going back up to but then there was some stuff in the summary, but I'll go back up to right here. Oh,
Yeah, it's like slide 43.
I've got to slow down. I think I go up one. There we go. Okay. So these were QC items, right? But the quality assurance were if again, I'd have to go look at the report, but off the top of my head, so like thickness and density, right? Were items that were in yield. Remember, I think it was thickness, density, and yield, and a contractor collected most of the data, like, again, on the binder and the moisture. Gradation was, again, it's probably back and forth depending on the agency, and I would have to go past that. I'd have to go look at the document I don't want to misguide you by, giving an answer like that I don't know without going and looking at the document. I hate to say that. Do you remember off the top of your head, Tim?
That's a good question. Clearly density, thickness, and I think those were the 2 most common, and then I think something with moisture and binder as well.
And while we're actually on this topic, there was an example that we didn't share that I think is a fabulous. I think it's one of the best I've ever seen put together, and that is if you go to the FHWA specs, there are a series of tables at the end of you go pick CIR, there is a series of tables, and it's got requirements for mix design, requirements for quality control, and acceptance requirements in these tables. And it makes things crystal clear for everybody involved as to what the requirements are. That's the only entity that we saw that had something documented in a single sort of place like that. And we highlight that in the you note that in the tech brief and highlight it in the report. It's a really good, not trying to pat FHWA on the back because we're doing this work for FHWA. I really believe it's really, really well done. And I think anybody that's writing a spec, that if they do that, it makes it clear to everybody exactly what's got to be done. So they list the again, mix design, quality control, acceptance, and then they'd list the test methods that were used. They would list the frequency, the sampling location, all those things. So it was crystal clear for everybody.
Right. And FHWA is pretty big, but I think, Adam, you specifically mean the federal lands highways specification.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Sorry about that.
yeah, no, that's great memory on that one. Okay. Well, that's all the questions I see. If you have any questions, we still have time to pop those in. In the meantime, while I give the last call for questions, I just want to remind everybody of some upcoming webinars that we have. On December 21st, we're going to talk about a workshop we had on how to reduce your carbon footprint, some techniques, needs, and opportunities. Adam Hand will lead that webinar. February, we have a webinar coming up on our balanced mix design peer exchanges, some of the findings and challenges to implementation. And that webinar will be led by Ellie Hodge. And then March 7th, that'll be the last webinar as part of this particular cooperative agreement. And in that one, we're going to highlight all the products and do an overall review of the products that were generated through this particular cooperative agreement, and that will be led by Ellie Hodge. So be sure to look on the website for registration on those. And I'm not seeing any further questions. Let's see, I'm checking real quick. Yeah, so with that, I think I might turn it over to Adam or Ellie for any kind of closing thoughts or comments.
Well, thank you, Tim. And I guess I'd like to start by thanking the again, the agencies that worked with us, provided us the time and information so that we could do this work. As well as again, thank you all for being here today. And also thank you again, those of you that are do or have served our country for thank you veterans for your service. And again, those that are currently serving as well. And again, if you have tough questions, please reach out to Tim. If you have easy ones, you can reach out to me. And again, I should have left that gone back there, but our emails are on the last slide. That I again thank you and we appreciate you showing up, and hopefully with where we're headed as a world in terms of sustainability, I think this is just these are really good tools in the tool to help us get there. So encourage you to look at them if you're not using them.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Tim. And just want to mention quickly, if you can please check the meeting chat. There's a link for a brief survey. If you can please give us your feedback, we appreciate that. So how we can do better the next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.